Welcome to Blended Scotch Reviews and Stab the Dragon Productions for a special Whiskey Holiday edition. Tomorrow is Saturday, May 17th, 2025, and that is a holiday for whiskey. Which holiday, you ask? World Whisky Day. So what is World Whisky Day? Where did it come from? This is celebrated on the third Saturday of May every year since 2012. So this is pretty recently. Blain Bowman started this annual celebration as a student at the University of Aberdeen, Scotland. And now, today, Bowman is a professional whiskey consultant and broker. It is simply a day to introduce people to the water of life, which is what the original term in the Gaelic meant. I think what they mean by World Whisky Day is that wherever you are in the world, that is, every nation, it is appropriate to celebrate with a dram of whiskey or a cocktail and introduce somebody to the wonders of whiskey in a responsible manner. My slight modification of this holiday is that since I live in the state of Texas in the USA, I will celebrate with a glass of whiskey from somewhere other than America. I like Canadian, Scotch, and Irish whiskeys, so I'm going to choose one of those world whiskeys. And tonight I have chosen Scapa, the Orcadian Skirin. Skirin is Old Norse for glittering, bright sky. A Scotch whiskey coming from the Orkney Islands. This is not quite the furthest north distillery in Scotland, but it's close. And I've had this Scapa open for way too long, probably 5 years at least, and so I really need to be drinking it. I have this problem with too many open whiskeys, and then many I never get to make a video of, so here we are. And since this is a Scotch, even though it's a single malt, I am publishing here under the Blended Scotch Review channel. How did I come to be interested in Scapa Scotch? I saw it in the store, goody here in Fort Worth, and immediately recognized the name from history because I had read a lot of World War I history and knew a bit about Scapa Flow, that is, the body of water in the Orkney Islands north of Scotland. As a part of the armistice between the Allies and Germany at the end of the war, the German fleet was to surrender itself to the British at the major Royal Navy base at Scapa. The German fleet commander, Admiral Ludwig von Reuter, did not want the British to have his ships, so he ordered his ship captains to scuttle them. Now, one way to scuttle ships is to use explosives and blow a hole in your ship, but his orders and actions were done in secret with no explosions. They simply opened portals underneath the waterline and let nature take its course. Now, the British caught on after a while, saw some ships getting low in the water, and went out there to try to intervene, and they managed to save 22 out of the 74 German Navy vessels. There are a couple of books on the situation. This is The Grand Scuttle, about that end of the war activity by the German fleet and the British response. And then here is a book on the Orkney Islands, Orkneylinga, something like that, saga, the history of the Earls of Orkney. Viking history, that. Now let's look at the whiskey. Just the facts. This non-age stated whiskey weighs in at 40% ABV, or 80 proof, and this 750 milliliter bottle cost me about $80. Got it at Goody in Fort Worth probably 5 years ago, maybe longer. It can be found at Specs Liquor for $82.52, maybe. Goody has it listed as out of stock for $80.59, but when you go to the website, this is no longer listed on the Scapa website. I think it's going away because they now have a 10-year, a 16-year, and a 21-year-old variety. So I don't know if you can get this particular version at this price. If you can, good for you, because this is tasty. Tasting notes, I get light fruit, apples and pears, heather, flowery, perhaps even perfume-like. No peat at all was made in the making of this whiskey. This is a gentle, mildly sweet whiskey that would make for a great introduction to single malts for a new consumer. I gave it a score of 86 on my scale, but a drinkability letter grade of A. And my recommendation. I'm glad I bought this, even at this high price, for me. This is my probably most expensive whiskey, but nowhere near my favorite. For me, whiskeys are more than taste, which is why I have my point system the way I do. Would I buy this again? Yes, or something from Scapa. I like the history that we'll get into here in a little bit. But if you like a fruity, light, flavorful Scotch with no peat, then you can try the Orcadian if you can find it. The history and location behind this whiskey just makes it very special, and that's really why I bought it. So let's get into the history. Well, here we go. The box. Yeah, there's the box. The Scapa distillery was established in 1885. Yeah, and the lid of the box has that date right there. By McFarlane and Townsend, some blenders in Glasgow. And the distillery was severely damaged in 1919 by a fire, but was saved by the Royal Navy. Sailors came out to put the fire out. It's right next door to the Navy base, apparently. In 1954, the distillery was bought by Hiram Walker and Sons out of Canada, the makers of Canadian Club, who rebuilt the distillery. Allied Distillers then purchased it in 1987, and it was mothballed in 1994. They rebuilt it, restored the distillery in 2004, and then proceeded to sell it to Pernod Ricard in 2005, and production started up again. In 2015, they opened a visitor center because the distillery tour industry had become a thing. The website says it is owned by Chivas Brothers now, which is owned by Pernod Ricard. And that also owns, Pernod Ricard actually owns Fort Worth's own TX Whiskey Distillery. It used to be Firestone and Robertson at Whiskey Ranch. So we are now adoptive cousins with Scapa. Imagine that. The Orkneys have a lengthy history with ancient Neolithic sites, villages, and monuments or megalithic structures. Some have Viking graffiti on them. Who knew? The Viking impact on the Orkneys was heavy. I've already discussed the events of World War I. So you've got Neolithic sites, you've got Viking stuff, you've got World War I stuff. A lot of good history there. So 5 out of 5 points for the history of Scapa. Bottle, label, and marketing. Classy, attractive box. There you go. And bottle. The label's got a sailboat. Well, the bottle's got a sailboat embossed right there. You can see that. But that should have been either a World War I cruiser or a Viking longship, in my opinion. The website was nice. On YouTube, I saw 4 to 5 short ads for Scapa, and even a couple of those were directly about this whiskey, the Orcadian. But those are a little bit older. In the ads, they had the same kind of sailboats as embossed here in the background. Impressive commercial, really. But I had to look for them. In other words, the commercials don't come looking for me or you. And one of the unique things about the Scapa Distillery is it's just a handful of guys operating it. So, like 3 to 5, something like that, some ridiculous number. So it's a small distillery. 5 points for bottle, label, and marketing. Appearance of the whiskey. This is light gold or straw. Fairly light. I mean, I'm going to give it a 2 points, but that's, probably a halfway to 3, 2.5 maybe, but 2 points. Composition. This is a non-age stated whiskey, 80 proof, and it says it's all from first fill American oak casks, single malt. And here in Texas, we're used to distilleries even telling us what kind of barley, what kind of corn or wheat or rye is being used. So, I don't know, Scottish barley, whatever. This bottle is batch number SK17. And again, it is the third most northern distillery in Scotland, just south of Highland Park. There you go. So you got really 2 distilleries on the Orcadian, Highland Park, and Scapa. The water they use comes from the river Lingro Burn, which has some peat in it, but they don't use the peat in drying the malt. They explain that they do not use any automated system at all in their process. It is all done by hand, the old-fashioned way, with a master distiller and 5 craftsmen. There you go, that's the number. So that's, I guess, 6. So it's really like a craft distillery for certain. So composition, 13 out of 15 points. Now let's go to the nose. Fruity, apples and pears, a little bit of maltiness, sweet, but not really a deep sweet, not like honey, I don't think. Perhaps a little grassy and flowery, perfumey. Very pleasant nose, and my nose is totally inadequate for the sniffing of whiskeys, but sometimes scotches come through. This one comes through. So really 10 points out of 10 on the nose. That is a delicious nose. Time to taste. And the taste is true to the nose. Mildly sweet, fruity, like the apples and pears, grass, heather, that perfumey, flowery taste. I get a lot of malt on here, so you really do taste that single malt. You know, there's just that unique quality that single malts have. It's you know, bourbon's got a harsh line through it that comes from the burned barrels, I think. Single malts have a harsh line through it that is just the barley. And I'm using the term harsh. It's strong. It's not, harsh is not a negative term here. I'm not using it in a negative way. But it's just a notable line throughout of the maltiness, the barley. It's there. No hint of peat at all. And you know what this reminds me of? I wish I had some now because I finished it several months ago. This reminds me, I had a friend gifted me a bottle of Cavalon ex-bourbon cask from Taiwan, single malt. And this reminds me of that. It does. At least the Cavalon I struggled with until the last third of the bottle, and then it got like this. Whereas this was this way the whole bottle. But so I wish I had some of that Cavalon to compare it. But that's what I'm remembering, is this is very similar to that. So this is overall a very gentle, fruity, sweet, wonderful, easy sipping whiskey. So 22 out of 25 points for taste. Mouthfeel, burn, and finish. For an 80 proof whiskey, this is very creamy. You get mouth tingles. Not really any burn up in the sinuses or down the throat. It's focused here in the mouth. And again, you get that that bold line of the single malt going right through the middle of it. The finish may be just a bit astringent. a hint of bitterness, but it's not an unpleasant bitterness. Pungent maybe, I'm not sure. But overall, a very nice mouthfeel, gentle burn. So again, this is not going to be scary. This is a great introductory whiskey for somebody who's never had a single malt before, I think. And the finish is fairly long lasting. I mean, I'm getting, you know, the flowery, appley pear notes lingering. So this is really a very nice long finish. And again, it's just 80 proof. 12 out of 15 points for mouthfeel, burn, and finish. Neat or mixer. Now, at this price, I would be aghast if somebody used this as a mixer. I'm just saying. But you do you. I like them neat. You know, it's something in the 40s and on down I could use as a mixer. So far, I don't think I've ever mixed a single malt. And I've got some single malts that are not that expensive. But usually if I'm going to use a mixer, it'll be a blended. So neat or mixer, though, 5 points because this is an excellent sipping, neat whiskey. I guess you could put this on ice. I haven't tried it on ice. Okay, I tend not to put ice in my whiskeys because it just dilutes it too much. But you could probably do that. So 5 points for neat or mixer. Price, value, and affordability. Again, Total Wine doesn't have this listed. Specs had it listed for $82.52 when I checked a few weeks ago. Goody Goodies got it listed for $80.59, but they say it's sold out, so kind of doubt it's coming back. After checking the website, it just looks like they're not continuing this. They're going with an age-stated 10-year-old. But I would say 7 points out of 10 for price value. But availability, that's the question. This may now be a ghost whiskey, which I tend to review a lot of ghost whiskeys, which, you know, that's what I got. There you go. So price, value, and availability. Only 7 points out of 10. Bonus points, 5 points, because the history here combined with the quality of the product is just outstanding. You know, is this overpriced as a non-age stated 80 proof whiskey? Maybe, you know, but I bought it. I wanted it. You know, and after tasting it, I can really say that this is a wonderful delight to drink. So, but I think you'd better, you know, search for it if you want it. But, you know, the history from the Neolithic to the Vikings to World War I, yeah, bonus points, 5 out of 5. And that gives me a total score of 86 points for the Scapa Orcadian. Letter grade, stressing drinkability, solid A. Now, my recommendation, I'm glad that I bought this, even at this price. And it's probably my most expensive whiskey, so, you know, that tells you what my budget is. Yet nowhere near my favorite. Now, this may be close to my favorite single malt, okay? You know, my single malt tastes range from Ardbeg 10 to here. And so I like both of those a lot, but they're very different. For me, whiskeys are much more than taste, though. And this is why I have my point system like I do. So would I buy this one again? Absolutely. And if I can't find this one, I might look for the other Orcadian, the 10-year. So if you like a fruity, light, flavorful Scotch with no peat, try the Orcadian, if you can find it. And so this is really a prize of my collection, which is why it is sitting idle on my shelf. I tend not to drink my favorite whiskeys. I don't know. But the history and location behind this whiskey just makes it very special to me. My bloodline includes Scottish and Viking heritage. So now when it comes to drinking this whiskey, I'm drinking part of my heritage, I think. Uh, it's just very special. But here, it's so easy to drink, and at 80 proof, it's not going to hurt you, burn you. But you got to be careful because I think you could very easily overdo this one. It's a delicate drink. There's no peat smoke, so if you're leery of peat smoke, try Scapa. Uh, I would say also be careful about what you're drinking after what you eat. So after a big spicy meal, this would not be good. I did that recently. When I first was going to try to do this whiskey in a review, I had had a spicy meal, and then after that I tried to do this, and it's like it wrecked the flavor. So you got to be sure not to overdo eating something that's really spicy. And again, at 80 proof, I would say don't drink this after you have a smoky whiskey or a high proof whiskey. All right, for blended Scotch reviews, this is Stab the Dragon out here.